What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Classic Octane. I am Taylor. So today we are jumping back on the CB550 project. Main thing I want to do today is completely strip down this thing all the way to the frame so we can push it outside, pressure wash all of the old grease and gunk off of it, get a nice bare frame for us to start to modify. Most of my parts are actually already in, so we should be able to make some really quick progress on this thing. Really quickly, I wanted to mention that I did get a brand new camera, so hopefully you guys are going to notice a much higher quality video. Also, hopefully the audio is better than the old GoPro I used as well. With any new camera, there's inevitably going to be a couple of growing pains, so I apologize ahead of time if we run into any kind of technical difficulties. Hopefully this is all good news, but please bear with me. This is the first video on the new camera, and then we'll get it all figured out, and hopefully there won't be any issues in the future. So this is where we left off in the last video. We determined that this engine is a complete boat anchor. It's totally rusted basically throughout the whole thing. We pulled this engine off the shelf and determined it's going to be a good candidate for us, and I did go ahead and order a complete top-end rebuild kit to throw in there. That's probably going to be, I don't know, in the next week or so that I tackle that. The main thing I want to do today is strip this thing completely down. So we'll yank that engine out, put it off to the side, and then I'm going to be replacing the wiring harness. I mean, we're not going to be using these gauges. We're going to change most of this bike, so most of this stuff needs to go. Got everything stripped down, and I'm happy to report we haven't run into any rusty hardware, broken any hardware, anything like that. Right now, I'm just kind of putting everything off to the side. I want to keep every single part I pull off of this thing because I've been bit in the past when I threw away a part thinking, oh, I definitely won't need that. I go to reassemble the bike and I'm missing a little bracket or something like that, and it's just a huge pain. So I suggest anybody doing this, just keep everything for now, and then once the build is done, you can go through and throw away and scrap whatever you're not going to use. So last thing to pull out is going to be the engine. It's just going to be a couple of engine mount bolts on the front, a couple of through bolts on the back, and I should be able to yank this thing right out. These CB550 engines, when they're complete with all the head and everything, is like maybe 125, 130 pounds. So I pull them out by myself pretty regularly. It's probably only, maybe 100 pounds or less in its current configuration. So it shouldn't be a big deal for me to yank that out, and we'll just throw it in the corner for now. But this thing's coming apart pretty nicely. Have all the engine mounts and everything off, so this thing should be ready to pick up and slide out of here. It's actually a little easier to grip if I had the head on here, but let's see. Try to get it up and out of the hump over here. Sure, got a good grip, and then I'm just going to go to the ground over here. Just like that. Only poured a little bit of that nasty watery oil out. Not bad at all. Got it pulled back in. All I do to clean these up is I typically wheel them outside, hose them down with a degreaser, let it sit for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, not much longer than that because the degreaser can actually eat away at some of the aluminum. Then I spray it all down with a pressure washer. That gets all the grease and grime off. It does end up removing some old paint, which is completely fine with me because I want to touch it all up anyway. And then we have a good starting point to modify the frame. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and pull off the wheels, the suspension, handlebars, front forks, get this thing all the way down to a bare frame so we can start to do a couple of modifications I'm going to do. We're not going to go crazy with this one, and then it'll be ready for a fresh coat of paint. here it is all stripped down, and I'm ready to kind of go over a couple of the frame modifications I'm going to make. So we're not going to go too crazy on this build. As I mentioned, we are not going to be doing a frame hoop. I'm going to keep the factory, what I'm going to call a frame horn on the back. We do need to cut off this rear support, and it will be replaced with a kind of flat bar that goes across. It'll add a little bit of support on there, but mainly what it's going to do is get a good mounting point for our rear fender. This whole factory bracing is going to stay. I actually had Toughside, I talked to Chris, who's the owner over there, about making me a seat where the mounting point goes through this factory location. That way I don't have to cut this off and put in a new flat bar. I can just keep that piece. So the seat we have that's over there on the ground has mounting points in the perfect spot. That all I'm gonna have to do is punch a couple of holes through this, and that will be our main seat mounting. I'll have to decide what I want to do about mounts for the front, but that's for another day. I do need to cut off this, which is where the factory seat lock went, so that where you actually stuck the key in and it popped the little latch up. We are not going to need that anymore. Not going to need this little tab. We also will not need this factory hinge mount for the seat. Other than that, everything else is going to stay on here. I'm going to keep these mounts. These are where the side covers go, because both of my side covers are actually in really good shape. So I decided for this build, I'm actually just going to paint them to match the tank, and we'll keep the factory side covers. I'm also going to attempt to keep the plastic section of the stock rear fender that kind of covers in here and prevents water from splashing up on all of the electronics and the side of the battery and all that kind of stuff. So I would like to keep that if at all possible. I don't see why I wouldn't be able to kind of just modify the top to fit with our new seat. But that should be it. I'm not going to do any frame modifications up here towards the front. So it's basically just cutting off a couple tabs. So angle grinder with a cutoff wheel and a Sawzall will make quick work of this. And got the frame all smoothed out everywhere we cut off brackets. Everything's ground down. Looks pretty good. So I'm ready to move on to the seat mounts, and also I believe the rear seat mount is going to double as a rear fender mount. So I threw the tank back in place so we can get the seat positioning just perfect. I don't want there to be a huge gap up here. I told you earlier I did have Toughside put in a set of mounts that are, I believe this is like 8.5 inches back from the front, which is right where this factory cross brace is. So what I need to do is just locate where those holes are going to be so I can punch those through. Once those are done, we'll move on to the back bracket. Since I'm going to weld that in, we'll do that second since it's a little bit more flexible. So with those in, I can kind of put the seat in place, push it all the way up as forward as I want it to go. Which I think about right there will be good. Make sure it's all nice and square. That'll be about perfect. And then I can actually look under the seat and see where my little mounting studs are, and I can just make a mark right on the side of the frame. I'm going to do it on both sides. Just like that. Now that I have those two reference marks, what I can do is actually just put a straight edge right across here, make a mark. That'll give me the distance my holes are going to be kind of back on the frame. For the spacing, I measured this, so they're right at 4¼ inches apart from each other. So what I can do is just go find the exact center of this frame and just come out, 2 1/8 inches on each side and put a little mark. We'll put this back up into place just to double check that our marks line up perfectly with our studs, and we'll pop a couple holes through there. Once that's done, like I mentioned, we'll move back to the rear frame mount, which we're gonna have to make custom. With the front 2 holes drilled, I can actually mount the seat up using wing nuts. You can probably just make them out in there. And that holds everything in place, make sure nothing moves for my rear mount. So the rear mount is gonna be very simple. It's gonna be a section of 1/8 inch bar stock that's gonna run directly across the top of the rear frame rails. We're gonna just weld it in right on the top of each side. So what I can do is actually just measure the distance between the 2 frame rails, say it's 9.5 inches. I will cut a piece of stock that long.
We can then drill the holes through for these two mounting studs and actually bolt it to the bottom of the seat. That'll hold everything in place while I can come in here with a MIG gun and just tack it to both sides. That'll be the foolproof way of making sure we get all our holes in exactly the position we want, nothing moves, nothing's out of place. Once all that's done, we can unbolt the seat and finish weld it. Really quickly, I did want to point out, this is the first time that Tough Sides offered the ability to put Honda in the back of the seat, kind of similar to what a factory Honda seat looks like. You can see on this guy. So I thought that was pretty cool. I opted in to try that out on this bike, and I think it's going to fit this build pretty well. The rear crossbar is all welded in. I went ahead and ground everything down to make it nice and smooth. So this should, with our 4 studs, just kind of fit just in place like that. All 4 of them come all the way through. Seat fits nice and flush. The beauty of these Tough Side seats is they are a little bit flexible, so it matches that natural curve of the frame, especially when they're tightened down. I will probably run just standard nuts on these instead of wing nuts like I used to use. I used to run wing nuts whenever I would build an electronics box so that you could remove the seat without needing any tools. This bike, since we're keeping the factory location for the electronics, you don't need to remove this seat really for any reason. So we'll probably just go with traditional bolts. It'll be a little bit cleaner than some larger wing nuts. I'm not going to worry about mounting the rear fender right now because this is the only one I have, and it has some like 6 or 7 extra holes in it that somebody drilled for whatever reason in the past, and they don't look great. So this is how the rear fender is going to be. It's going to be a nice short fender, kind of just like that. But I need to look through my storage and see if I have another one, because this one's in pretty rough shape, and I'd rather not use that if I don't have to. That's just going to be 2 holes anyway, so that's going to be simple enough to do. So right now what I'm going to do is wipe this whole thing down with a quality wax and grease remover, get all the grinding dust, grease, grime, anything that's left over that wasn't removed from pressure washing or that I have added grinding, so this thing is ready for paint. And here's the result after 2 coats of VHT roll bar and chassis. That is my go-to paint for these frames. Super durable after it cures. Today is Friday. I will probably just leave it just as you see it over the weekend to give it plenty of time to dry. But man, it looks so good. All you need to do is mask up a couple of the areas where you obviously don't want to get any paint. Anything that's threaded, I either tape off or just plan to go back over with a tap just to clear out the threads. There are a couple of places as well in the frame that are grounds that you'll either want to tape off and keep bare metal or plan on grinding back later. But for the most part, you can kind of clean it up real well and then just get after it. But I am extremely happy with these results. Well, that's going to be it for this one, guys. We made a ton of progress on the CB550 project this week. Next week, I'm going to jump on probably the carburetors and the top end rebuild and cleanup of the engine. That way we can get those ready to go back in the bike. Then the rest of it's just kind of small stuff, cleaning up and painting the wheels, putting on some new tires, and reinstalling all of the stuff we just took off. So this project should go pretty quickly. I believe all of the parts are already in. My goal is to have this thing done by the end of August, so the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for more content on this bike, as well as I have a couple of car videos coming up, and I also have a Will It Run video planned, hopefully for this month as well. So I appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'll see you on the next one.